The human story is the search for belonging. From childhood to adulthood, in joy and in struggle, we all sit in questions of how to make sense of it all. What is our place? Why are we here? What is our story of searching? Join us in conversation with community members, each sharing some of their own story. I am Ben Spratt, and this is Belonging. So it is a true pleasure to be getting to sit with a beloved friend and fellow member of our Rodeph Sholom family, Dr. Rodeph Accordino. Just a few words on what brings Robert here today. I want to make sure everyone knows that he's currently a practicing pediatric and adult psychiatrist, assistant professor of psychiatry at Weill Cornell Medical College, and also the chief medical officer at Able2. If you've not heard of Able2, you should. It's a leading provider of tech-enabled mental health services, and it's scaled all around the country and actually involves 2,000 mental health clinicians. Also, it's worth noting, not everyone has this accolade. In 2016, he was appointed by President Barack Obama to the White House Fellowship, where he advised the Secretaries of Defense of both the Obama and the Trump administrations on healthcare delivery, technology, and payment innovation for service members and their families. And because of this work, he actually received the Secretary of Defense Medal for Outstanding Public Service. Our journey goes back about more than 15 years. And as a first-year medical student, this is what everyone does in their first year of medical school, known for spaciousness and relaxation, actually Robert founded the nonprofit organization Music for Autism, served as its executive director and leading the charity's fully subsidized program's national expansion. Music for Autism, and specifically Robert's leadership, was the place that we turned to as we were building our Shireinu program. And it was actually me sitting at Robert's feet, along with Rabbi Levine and Gina Levine, that allowed us to shape Shireinu, which now has become a model of spiritual community for families of all needs, bringing an inclusive environment to churches and synagogues now all around the world. And it's really thanks to you, Robert. And I'm grateful that over 15 years, we have shared many moments together, and joyous moments and difficult moments, mourned together, celebrated together. And it is a gift to have you as a part of Rodeph Sholom family and continue that journey together today.
Thank you, Rabbi Ben. Thank you for those kind words. The feeling is mutual. It's an honor and a privilege to be here. And Shireinu is just such a beacon of hope, particularly during these dark times, but also just the extraordinary impact that Rodeph has around the world now through Shireinu. So thank you, and thank you for that kind introduction. It's really an honor to be here.
So, as you know, this is a chance for us to be in conversation that's really all sparked by this prompt. To please tell us about your search for belonging.
As we just discussed, I think this is sort of a full circle moment because so much of Music for Autism and Shireinu is about belonging. The concept of belonging, which I think is one that we iterate on and morphs throughout our lives in terms of what that means. But truly, it's a concept in terms of people feeling comfortable in a public space, what we were aiming to do for these families with developmental conditions who would otherwise be shut out or feel too ashamed to be a part of something. But I think in my own life, this has certainly been something that has been a theme throughout my life and has been an inspiration. You know, I think my parents really taught me resilience, and I want to talk about them a bit. One of the things that I'm most grateful for, my family has been together this week, and my brother lives in LA with his wonderful wife and 3 kids, and they were all here, and my dad is here too. We've been spending a lot of time together as a family, and I've reflected on this. My brother and I were so lucky to have the parents that we had, in that they really exposed us. My brother and I are like very, very different in terms of our interests, and they exposed us to a whole array of things for us to see what stuck and where we belonged. And I think this is ultimately in my practice and in my supervision of therapists at Able2, this is central to one's life of sort of figuring out in a social environment or professional environment, you know, what has the most resonance, where you feel you fit in and can be your most authentic self and can contribute.
And so I'm wondering for you, as you think about the moves that you made You've obviously taken a much harder path. I've not gone to medical school myself, but I have heard that there are easier paths than that. What got you through that? What allowed you to feel like, even as you face the immediate challenge of looking around in your medical school class and feel like other people may have done work that you hadn't yet and felt more, maybe others around you were more prepared for this? What actually made you decide, you know what, I'm going to do this? Was it that conversation with your dad? Was it talking to your mentor? I mean, what were the moments that made you say it's worth it in the end?
I think having a really strong why. I'll never forget, medical school was super challenging. I was an untraditional medical student. I got in through this early admission program and didn't have all the tools and how exactly to manage an extraordinary amount of information that you were responsible for learning in a very short amount of time. Eventually got there, but there were a lot of challenges. And Dr. Richard Rubin, who was my dearest friend's dad, his dad was a doctor, and the first doctor I ever shadowed, he was an OBGYN, and we went and delivered babies when I was in middle school together. And I was like, wow, this is really what I want to do. I love science. And then when I hit that first stumbling block in the first months of medical school, I was like, what is this? I had no idea what I signed up for. This is like a hazing experience. He said to me, you want to stick with it because you never know. There's not a greater gift to give when there's someone in need whom you love, a family member who needs medical help. And this is true in life, like almost on a daily basis. There's especially now, unfortunately, there's ever-growing number of people who are looking for help when it comes to mental health or physical health, and just being sort of medically up to date and informed to help people. That is an extraordinary gift. But it was most poignant for me when this happened way too soon, when I was in residency, and my mom, who really was my person and someone who just was the best of us. She was an elementary school teacher and just an extraordinary person whose lessons continue to impact my brother and me every day. And she got this terrible cancer diagnosis that just was a bad luck genetic mutation. And the non-smoker related lung cancer, it's called non-small cell lung cancer. It's a huge killer of women in their 60s. And she got this terrible, terrible diagnosis. And my dad and I really bonded because we were like, I was like the medical advisor to her treatment, which when she was diagnosed, even though she was doing so well, essentially should have lived for 2 months and lived for 2.5 years. And we were able to sort of navigate things together. And my dad always said, I don't know how people do this without having a doctor translator. I'll share with you, and I brought it with me. I have this most cherished possession in life, which was from February 24th, 2015. So this is a card from my parents in the context of all of this happening. And I just wanted to quote my mom, because this is something that has served as sort of a guiding light for me since this horrible, horrible setback and loss. So she wrote, and this card has it's a cloud with a wink. So she wrote, although you know this is one journey I did not want to take with you, I am blessed that you are the captain of my ship. As you always do, you rose to the occasion with leadership and knowledge, always navigating through murky waters with compassion and firmness. For these reasons, I am truly lucky, certainly lucky to have extraordinary you in my life. And this has been, I go back to during challenging times, and she signed All My Love, Mom. You know, she is this guiding true north. And the grief is that even though we had an amazing hospice experience and just shared so much with her, and the grief is just that unexpressed love, even though we express so much of it. And it's sort of like Andrew Garfield said this about losing his mom, which I thought was really moving. You sort of don't want to lose that grief because you want to keep someone present. But it's a loss that's felt all the time. And it certainly, it was a reminder of this path, this journey of practicing medicine, which really is a practice, and it's an ongoing learning journey. And feeling like in medicine, I belong in a community of healers that is very central to my identity. I'm grateful to have had the parents who sort of helped support me to get there, and all the things my mom handled me with empathy and firmness to get me through that journey, which was very tough. And I sort of needed parenting more than I ever did. And just the closeness with my dad and in navigating this journey with him and my brother to support my mom at the end of her life, which we just wish hadn't happened so soon. And I said this in my mom's eulogy, to get back to her again for a moment. Medical school aspires to teach you how to care for people, but truly, I learned it all from her.
And Robert, I'm so grateful that you are leaping right into the deep end of the pool in so many ways. As I know, as you look at the arc of your life, as we've talked about together, it is often in grief that we see so many of the threads of what gives us a sense of belonging ripped away from us. And, especially as a healer, where much of your driving purpose, I imagine, is how you can impact and not only help extend, but maximize the life that people have. It also throws you into the existential waters of being able to see that sometimes in the pain, sometimes in the loss, we come to a deeper sense of belonging. And in the way that she continues to be a guiding light, even beyond death, in the way in which you as a healer also have to come up against the reality of the limitations of that. And to imagine that maybe the greatest blessing you gave your mother is the rare but excruciating experience some people have is, as a parent, to spend so much energy to inspire their child to reach and to dream and to aspire, and to then be in the position of needing to be cared by them. And the power dynamic that I'm sure she had to grapple with, not only your willingness to step forward, but what a powerful way to illustrate belonging is that even in the loss of that, also was the galvanizing of it for you.
And it's interesting. I read, there was this op-ed today about Hirsch's mom being this extraordinary beacon of hope, and it was written by an op-ed writer at the New York Times who 6 months before had lost her own child to cancer. And there is this similarity of what's happened recently with the hostages and cancer, of trying to outwit an extraordinary emperor of all maladies. It was an extraordinary parallel to think about, because I also do a fair amount of psycho-oncology work and working with patients with cancer. And, there's always this desire to do more and really sort of where medicine meets pastoral care, and where our fields really come together, because in medicine and oncology in particular, we really are taught to continue fighting this battle. And sometimes you're trying to fight battles and you're losing the war. It's important to infuse holistic care into all this. But that's why there's programs to teach physicians pastoral care. Where our fields really overlap, but there's limits to what the science can do.
And I do think it's interesting, because I think as I reflect on moments where I've sat with grieving families, people facing terminal illness, even sitting with people as they take their last breath, the impulse of wanting to fix and the impulse of wanting to beat death and pain it seems like we're hardwired for it. And yet, grief is simply love persisting. And yet, belonging is simply an understanding that my own story is connected to others, and that maybe the Bible has it right, that love is stronger than death, but it's not often how we talk about it. And so in some ways, and I know because of the work that you've done, it's diving into the scariest end of the pool, which is really the one that has no perfect answers.
Right.
And I'm sure the number of people who have turned to you and said, "Doctor, please just tell me what's going to happen. Please tell me it's going to be okay." And there's limits to what you can promise and what you can guarantee. And so, and I know that part of this year has been defined not only by you looking at the mental health needs here in America and here in New York in particular, but I know you decided to be a part of medical first responders flying out to Israel, to be there on the ground, facing people in the midst of just immeasurable trauma and rupture. And I was just wondering if you could talk about that experience, because it's one that very few people, especially with your training, have ever really encountered before.
Yeah. It was one of the most profound experiences of my life. And I think it's the closest I've come to understanding why folks make Aliyah to Israel, because I never felt such a gravitational pull. So it was the first time the context is it was the first time in 50 years where Israel recognized that there would be a physician shortage. So the reason why I felt so compelled to help is that it was the first time in the world. I had actually tried to do this in Poland, the Ukrainian border, when the invasion started 2 years ago. They didn't want mental health professionals. It was the first time when there was sort of the second time with world events that I felt my training as a physician could be uniquely helpful. And I think when that's the case, and this is what I explained to my family, varying results, like you have to step up to the call to at least sort of raise your hand. What was interesting, the most relevant to the situation was actually the lessons we learned in 9/11, unfortunately, which I think is such an important story to tell. I mean, these hospitals are such an amazing example of harmonious coexistence between Palestinians and Israelis. So first of all, there's doctors in training who are Palestinian and Israeli. Arabic is spoken as much as Hebrew. I was on an inpatient unit with teenage patients, but a whole host of those caring for them. So psychologists, psychiatrists in training, social workers. We then were taking consults on the pediatrics floors of kids coming in with asthma exacerbations who also had bipolar illness, or they can't discharge a kid to the hospital because, and this was a patient on my team, this child could not be discharged to Gaza, a Palestinian patient, so was going to stay in the hospital, and how we could line up sort of psychosocial supports in the context of what was going to be a very long hospital stay. And then consults to the emergency department, oftentimes kids after suicide attempts. So these were the things that I was helping with, and what I was helping with most of all when the hospital's overstretched. These are teaching hospitals like we have in the US, but when they're overstretched, much less teaching happens. So the residents, the doctors in training, they're making the same mistakes. So I just became this like additional teacher. What was most amazing is that, psychiatry, there's so many cultural aspects of psychiatry. We don't understand the neurobiology of psychiatric conditions. When we fully understand them, they're no longer psychiatry. Like when we understand the exact mechanisms, they become part of other medical specialties. But just sort of watching what was happening 10 out of 10 times, not because I'm so smart or anything like that, it's just because these conditions, the way they present, really are predictable, and sort of it's pattern recognition that is just like an asthma exacerbation, except we don't understand the science as well specifically. And it was amazing that there were girls with emerging borderline personality disorder or borderline traits who were saying the same things that are said on inpatient units in Boston or in New York where I trained. Like, you could sort of see these movies play out, and that, to me, being thousands and thousands miles away, of these conditions that unfortunately have a lot of stigma because of our lack of understanding of them, but the fact they were presenting in such similar ways was really profound. Mm-hmm. And 9/11, unfortunately, was this collective trauma that October 7 is similarly, and Israel's such a small country the size of New Jersey, everyone is connected to a hostage. This was such a traumatic and horrible display of terrorism. And one of the things we learned in 9/11, which was really interesting to teach, was to sort of bring supportive therapy to the community. You don't want all these people all of a sudden, they can't have everyone just showing up to the hospital, overtax the hospital, because there's going to be the typical having heart attacks or hip fractures and so on and so forth. So these hospitals can't withstand that demand. So bringing care into the community. And the form of doing this when there's like a huge need all of a sudden is to do group psychotherapy. So we were training folks to do trauma-informed group psychotherapy. The last thing I'll say about this is, when I actually showed up with the head of child psychiatry, the team cried. I think they had become so accustomed to people not showing up, people sort of saying they would do something and not being able to do it because it's Israel, because it's complicated. But my sense of belonging in terms of my Jewish identity, it's sort of, I couldn't even imagine what I experienced and what that was like. It just was awe-inspiring, and I truly got a lot more than I gave. And the connectedness I now feel we're actually doing with a group of child psychiatrists, actually my closest mentor in child psychiatry, Dr. Laura Prager, we're co-leading this ongoing series, which we're going to do through all of 2025 of American child psychiatrists teaching Israeli residents to continue this impact over Zoom. But there's a sense of community there that I think is so special and belonging that I don't know exists in the same way in the US, just in terms of like social support and, how a community cares for one another, and what makes the last almost year just so tragic in terms of how it's impacted really the soul of this nation that is collectively grieving in such a profound way. So
perfectly said. And the just sheer, almost immeasurable tragedy layered upon tragedy, and truly generations of trauma that now are going to ripple forward. It is more than just grieving a moment. It's really a rupture of the feeling of belonging, of safety for so many, and I think in the context of American Judaism, we have certainly seen that just as you were reflecting kind of a personal level of grief with your mother, we can in grief spin in multiple directions. It can both be the thing that galvanizes us most, that makes us recenter a sense of what are we really attached to and what really matters when those threads of safety and well-being are just torn asunder. But it can also do the opposite, is that it can both galvanize, but it also can create a sense of distance and loneliness. And I think in the American Jewish community, we've seen this. For some people, this has been the time to double down on the feeling of Jewishness and the sense of peoplehood and the sense of solidarity. And for some people, it's been the moment where the loss of feeling comfortable to do so, or feeling like there are actions or behaviors, that the state of Israel's engaged in that they wouldn't engage in themselves. And
right.
I think, part of what you're getting to, though, is that if we leave it up to our just innate reactions and responses, it doesn't necessarily actually move us into a better place of well-being. It may, but not always. And that sometimes what we need is the person who's willing to sit with us in the rupture to remind us that we're not alone, and in some ways ask us the question of, more than just responding to this moment, what's the larger tapestry? What is that larger thread of belonging that might pull us beyond the trauma? And I was just wondering, for you, I don't want to oversimplify the incredible work you do, but in thinking about, our conversations 15 years ago with Music for Autism, and think about the arc of your career, again and again, you've chosen to dedicate yourself to this acknowledgement that we may not be able to control the pain, the wounds in our lives, but we can be the ones who choose whether we show up for people in those moments. And I'm just wondering, what gets you through that? Again, I hope this doesn't go into too personal an area, but how do you find the energy to do this again and again, to step to the margins, to step to the people who are often ignored or forgotten in a world that does not respond to pain well, and so we try to shut it down, move it away, make it feel it's okay and not close to us? What propels you to be the one who's willing to be countercultural? And whether it's in Israel or whether it's here in New York, to be the one to step into that and try to create space, embrace, and give vocabulary to what feels unimaginable.
Well, it's very kind of you to, it means a lot for you to be saying that in the first place. But I think it's in these traumatic experiences that can make people realize that life is finite, and to be deliberate with that life that's been given to you. But I think actually the quote that I've shared with many patients, it's actually in Man's Search for Meaning, a Viktor Frankl quote. So the Viktor Frankl quote is, the highest value of all is to choose your attitude in situations under which you have no control. Between what happens to us, the stimulus, and our response to the stimulus is a space. In that space lies our freedom and power to choose our responses. And in those choices lies our growth and our happiness. And, this quote to me, he, of course, psychiatrist and a Holocaust survivor, and is speaking of his search for meaning in the context of being in a concentration camp. What's so powerful about it is it's not, you can always compare it to your stress, think about what's happening, in Ukraine or what's happening. And I think that can fall flat because you can't invalidate. If a patient comes to you anxious, you can't try to negotiate your way out. It's like, you have it really great. But I think in this quote, it really exemplifies for me just, that every day is a choice. And some days we all do it better than others. But I think it's such important learning. And it's centering. And I remind myself of that quote often in, giving advice to loved ones, but also, with patients, with patient care.
Robert, I want to offer gratitude. There's 1,000 more questions to ask. But hopefully this is just the beginning of a long, long journey together in this Rodeph Sholom family, and so grateful for the ways that you have and continue to be my teacher, and grateful that in a world where so many of us do everything we can to escape facing the wound, the pain, and the rupture, you can model in your own life that it's often in those very things that have ruptured our sense, destroyed our sense of belonging, that we can find a new, perhaps even more resilient sense of it that is truly showing that love is stronger than death. So grateful for you, my friend.
Grateful for you, Rabbi Ben. Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you for joining us and listening to this story of belonging. Stay connected with us on Facebook and Instagram. For more information about CRS, visit us online at rodefsholom.org.